Welcome back. We are sort of continuing our Victoria 3 pre-release content production where we don't have a lot to work with and we're trying to analyze what we have available. What we are doing now is part 2 of the Paradox Grand Strategy tutorials. I'm reacting to these and sort of giving my thoughts as well as some additional thoughts as we go through them. If you just want to watch the tutorials themselves, I encourage you to stop this video and just go over to their page on Paradox Grand Strategy, but I will be giving my reaction and my thoughts on these various mechanics, effects, and stuff. Pop needs with Party
Hey everybody, it's Party Elite, and you know me from my own YouTube channel where I cover strategy games similar to Victoria 3 extensively. Today I'm collaborating with Paradox Interactive to introduce you to a major driving force in the world of Victoria 3. The needs of your people, where they come from, how they're fulfilled, and the repercussions of doing so. Needs in Victoria 3, as far as our conversation today is concerned, are purely materialistic. Every person in the world has them, and their wealth level determines exactly what they are. This means that every pop, as determined by their type, culture, faith, location, and place of employment, will have its own set of needs based on that pop's wealth level. Naturally, then, as pops move from one wealth level to another, either upwards or downwards, the demand for the needs associated with their new wealth level goes up, as there are now more people looking for the same goods and services. To see exactly what a pop...
This is also what just drives Victoria 3's, like a lot of its economy, is the consumption of pops. And so because as a pop consumes a good, it increases the demand for it, which increases the price of the good, which makes your factories more profitable, which the factories and such employ all the people, which gives them more money so that they can consume more, and it's just all moving around.
Pop needs, you can use the nested tooltips to pull up a list of the categories of needs, and going one step further, you can see exactly which goods they're using to fulfill each category of need, as well as how much they're spending on each good.
It might be the case that, for example, if you looked at, we can probably go back a half step, their consumption of food, it might be the case that production of certain types of food, for example, will empower one interest group, and because you don't want to empower that interest group, you might want to, focus more on the production of the other foods. The one I can think of is that I believe that grain empowers the landowners. I'm not sure if fish empowers the landowners. And so if you were looking to kind of disempower the landowners, this might be an avenue of doing it. It seems that largely the way you can kind of have control in Victoria 3 is you want to take money out as the government, and you also want your pops to consume, and this is at tension. You can't do both of these things. I mentioned this a lot in the previous version, or in the previous video, but you can't do both of these things. And so you want to be selective and extract wealth from the economy when it disempowers the interest groups you don't like, and inject wealth into the economy when it empowers interest groups you do like. And so this could be like an example where you are trying to make fisheries, assuming they're not owned by landowners, the way in which you are satisfying the material needs of food for your people, and not focus on grain, which is more landowner-based.
As well as how much they're spending on each good. As you can see, there are a variety of goods that can be used to fulfill any one category of need. If you want to see a list of almost all the goods in-game, and who needs them and why, you can use the trade lens and look through the goods listed under either import or export trade routes. Here you can choose a type of good and, through the tooltips, you can get a better understanding of which wealth levels need...
It's a little funny he's using Japan right now because he can't trade with anyone because he's an isolationist.
...need that good and for what purpose. Not all wealth levels use the same goods for the same things, and some goods are substituted for higher-end versions at higher wealth levels, though there is a bit of overlap at times. There is one need that doesn't show under the trade lens, as it can't be imported or exported, and that is services.
Oh, services.
You can find that under the...
I think you also cannot export transportation, so this might be an error, but okay.
Market tab instead, with further breakdowns as to what it's needed for and by whom. Again, there are other goods that fulfill the services need that can be traded, but generic services themselves must be produced and provided locally. It's worth noting that your pops will seek the most financially viable option to fulfill each category of need, but they will also be influenced by factors other than cost at times. The best example of this involves cultural obsessions and taboos, where a culture may be particularly inclined to consume a specific good more than others, or to avoid it as much as possible.
I've talked about this in a few spots, but I think that Muslims being tabooed on alcohol provides an interesting opportunity where you actually want to produce a ton of alcohol in Muslim countries and just export it, because when you're producing alcohol, it also, the product, like from the grocer, for example, it also has like an output of groceries, so you're producing groceries and alcohol. And so what you do is when you're exporting the alcohol, you eliminate the trade tariff and you just focus on exporting it a lot, which makes the grocers a lot of money, which makes them more profitable, which allows you to have more of them, which allows you to produce more groceries at a lower price. So if you can drive up the price of one of the outputs of an industry, you'll drive down the price of the other one, and since your pops are eating the groceries and not the alcohol, this will make it a cheaper sort of way of acquiring higher standard of living for your pops, while still having a profitable industry. So, for example, if your industry only has one output, let's say that output is fish, when you drive down the price of the fish, you make your industry less profitable. And so there's this tension where you want both profitability of the industry as well as cheap goods for your pops. And so when industry has two outputs and you can drive up the price of one you're not consuming, you're not eating, and drive down the price of another that you are eating, this seems like a place where you can extract a lot of value for your economy and your pops.
Under intoxicants, for example, any pop of Han culture will be obsessed with opium, and will be more likely to use opium as their intoxicant of choice, even if it's astronomically more expensive. By contrast, any pop belonging to the Muslim sects will try to minimize how much they use liquor as an intoxicant, regardless of how cheap it might be, because it's considered a taboo. This isn't to say consumption is entirely under the control of these obsessions and taboos. They will never be the only way to fulfill a need category, nor will they ever be completely avoided. But the spread of which goods are used to fulfill a need category will be affected, which will influence how you will want to adjust supply and demand to improve your people's lives and the affordability of their lifestyles.
I think in-game you're going to have to make a decision on almost every good, or maybe you don't have to make a decision, but I think it might be really useful to think about goods in this way is, do I want this good to be expensive or do I want it to be cheap? The value of it being cheap is, if it's an input good, it makes the industries that use it as an input more profitable, and if it's a consumption good, when your pops consume it for cheaper, their buck could go further in terms of increasing their standard of living. The reason why you want goods to be expensive is if you have a bunch of industries or if you have a bunch of factories or production buildings in an industry where the good is expensive, those will be insanely profitable, and profitability is good. And so, in instances where you're not using something as an input or consuming, you'll really want the price to be high. When you are using it as an input and you're consuming, you will have a mixed feelings, and how you resolve the tension is up to you. But I think the places to try and acquire a lot of value will be to try and really kick up the price of goods that you don't really need to consume or use as an input method.
Market forces in Victoria 3 work as you'd expect. Whether due to obsessions, economic mobility of your pops, or starting conditions, if there's more demand for a product without enough supply, it will be more expensive. Adding a consumption tax to a certain good will make it even more expensive for your pops, though it will generate wealth for your treasury as well. Alternatively, whether due to taboos, a drop in wealth levels, or starting conditions, if there is less demand for a product with a huge surplus, it will become less expensive.
Also important to note, when you put in a consumption tax, it's going to drive the price of the good down. It's going to make the industries that produce it less profitable. This is because the POP considers the consumption tax when they are buying it, and so the equilibrium will be lower, the equilibrium price. So less will be consumed, it'll be less profitable.
And again, of course, removing a consumption tax on a good will also help reduce the cost for POPs who purchase it. These price fluctuations don't stop POPs from spending money for their needs, even if it means eating into their accumulated wealth and dropping in wealth levels as a result, slowly getting more and more radicalized, eventually turning their displeasure into violence.
I've mentioned this before. I think it's really interesting that the POPs, in terms of radicalization and there's loyalism, they care about relative improvement and relative getting worse. And so it might be the case that when you are improving the standard of living, you want to try and throttle it over time, where you don't want like this jerky like improvement if you're going to like go down later. And there are ways you can maybe throttle it. For example, if you have a new production method for clothing, let's say, that makes the clothing production way higher, which is going to drive down the price of clothing, which makes it cheaper for your pops. Something you could do instead is start taxing it right as you put the production method in, to try and make the improvement a little more flat. I don't know if this level of micromanagement will be effective, because, like, don't have the game in front of me, but it's something that you can consider and test out.
Depending on the type of society you're trying to build, you'll want to prevent these drops in wealth levels among your various pops, and so it's essential that you maintain or improve supply levels to meet demands. You can't let goods get too cheap either, though. That will hurt your GDP and rank, and it'll reduce the profitability of buildings in your nation, which means they won't actually be able to pay wages, ultimately destroying your economy. Adjusting supply can be done either internally, by changing production levels at home, or it can be done with the help of external forces, using trade.
I think it might be the case that long-term, something that you might want to do is actually focus mainly on importing inputs for your later tier production, which maybe leaves you a little bit vulnerable, but some countries can produce, like, lumber cheaper, for example. Like, notably, I've seen that Russia has bonuses for producing lumber, and so you can, if you can get a trade agreement with Russia where there's no tariffing going on, then you can import the input good much cheaper than you would be able to produce it yourself.
Ultimately, you need to find the perfect balance between keeping buildings profitable and paying wages, and keeping the cost of goods low so that some of those wages can be kept as savings for pops you want to empower. But which pops do you want to empower? Well, that's where interest groups come in, a topic we'll discuss in the next video.
Okay, so that was Pop Needs tutorial. Let's jump into the interest groups tutorial, again with Party Elite.
Hey everybody, it's Party Elite, and you know me from my own YouTube channel where I cover strategy games similar to Victoria 3 extensively. Today I'm collaborating with Paradox Interactive to introduce you to a major driving force of your societies in Victoria 3. Interest groups. We'll discuss what they are, their traits and happiness, and the importance of clout. Interest groups represent the political power that your people hold when they work towards a common goal amongst themselves. Pops pick which interest groups to join based on their profession, wealth, and education access, as long as they're not discriminated against in some way, and as long as they're not too illiterate or too poor to be politically active. As groups of pops that have similar social, political, and economic interests as far as policymaking and ideologies are concerned, they represent the voice of the people, encouraging or discouraging social and political change as best suits their needs. Their demand...
I think it might be the... Oop. Am I frozen? Don't like that. Shit. I think I'm back, and I don't think, so I had froze up a little bit. The recording time is not that much higher, so I think we'll just keep going for this video. Apologies if there was a long pause, but I think we're good now.
Plans can come about in both peaceful and violent ways, and so you'll want to influence which interest groups wield the most power in your nation to help control how your society develops. It's important to note that though there...
I think the way you are also going to, like, try and look at this is you want to inject wealth into your economy towards the interest groups you want, and extract wealth from your economy away from the interest groups you don't want. And when I say inject and extract, I mean that you want the wealth to go to the treasury, and then you want the wealth in the economy. Because throughout the entire game, I think there's this tension between wanting the wealth in the treasury and wanting the wealth in the economy. And so when you are making decisions of where to extract it, the best way to look at it is I want to extract from the interest groups I don't like and pump in for the interest groups I do like.
There are interest groups with the same names spread throughout the world. They are sometimes represented with unique names to represent a minor difference between two otherwise similar interest groups. The Sikh priesthood, for example, has Sikh militancy as an ideology, not something you're likely to find among the Mahayana monks, who are decidedly not Sikh. In addition to that, even interest groups with the exact same name across national borders will be somewhat different at times. Apart from three core ideologies, the current leader of the interest group will add a fourth ideology based on their personal leanings, unless they're a moderate, in which case they do not add a fourth ideology. Whatever they may call themselves though, interest groups always serve the same overarching purpose, have the same moving parts, and work in similar ways. To see which interest groups exist in your nation, you can use the outliner, breaking them down into interest groups and marginalized groups, where the latter refers to interest groups that lack any real political power in the form of clout. Each interest group has
What country does he have selected? It looks like Canada. Notice that the Anglican Church and the landowners are particularly powerful, and I think that if you want to pass a lot of liberal laws, for a lot of countries, getting through the landowners is going to be a bit of a problem. Although 20% is not super high, a lot of the more like backward-looking countries like have over 50%.
A certain amount of clout, an approval level, ideologies, traits, and a leader. Ideologies, as discussed previously, come as three core aspects plus one from the current interest group's leader, and they represent which laws an interest group opposes, endorses, or is ambivalent about. Interest groups will often push for policy changes that match these ideologies or push against reforms they oppose even after they've been passed. This can cause social and political friction that can eventually result in civil war if left unchecked. Their opinions about currently active laws and policies are a major contributor to their current approval levels, alongside recent law changes, whether they're in the government or in the opposition, how powerful they are, leader traits, and radicalization of the pops in the interest group. Their approval levels, meanwhile, influence which of the three traits are actively having an impact on your nation. A malus from an approval rating at or below -5, a small bonus from an approval rating above 5, and an additional bonus from an approval rating above 10. Again, these are largely consistent between the same interest groups across nations. The positive and negative impacts from active traits are further affected by the interest group in question's clout. This is a measure of the interest group's political strength as a percentage of the total political strength of your pops across all interest groups, whether they're marginalized or not.
I think one of the difficulties is going to be that you can't just tackle, or it's very dangerous to try and tackle interest groups head on, and instead you have to try and slowly chip away at their power in subtle ways. I think is how the game is set up to be like how you play it, and so this is going to involve doing stuff, as I talked about earlier, for example, building fisheries instead of farms if the fisheries are owned by not the landowners and the farms are owned by the landowners, like this sort of thing, as opposed to just like saying, I'm going to try and push through this law, they're going to hate it, they're going to rebel, I'm going to crush the rebellion.
Political strength is generated through votes in an election where applicable, though it's primarily generated through politically active pops and their collective wealth, where pops have less than expected political strength in unincorporated states and more than the expected in the capital state.
I think this is a really important thing to note / think about. In terms of industries where you don't want to empower the people, you can just have them in your colonies or in unincorporated states and try to play like this, especially because industries get benefits from economy of scale, and so you'll want to kind of localize, like, have one industry just built up super tall in places anyways, and so this might be a way you look at it where if you want to industrialize, you want to have like a lot of the industrialist owned buildings in your states that are integrated, and then not in the ones that aren't.
This means then that the number of pops in an interest group, their wealth levels, and their location all play a role in how much clout an interest group has, which in turn determines whether they are powerful, with clout over 20%, influential, with clout below 20%, or marginalized, with clout below 5%. Clout also directly impacts how likely a policy change is to happen, as the sum of the clout of interest groups that support the change represents the percentage chance of the change going through each cycle.
I don't know how big the effect is going to be, but it also looks like excess bureaucracy makes the ticks happen faster, and so it might be the case that you want to eat more paper and build more bureaucratic administrations than you would otherwise want to, just to have excess bureaucracy to pass laws faster.
But that's a conversation for later. It's important to keep in mind, though, that if you do want to push for a policy change, at least one of the interest groups that endorses it needs to be in your government. If they aren't, you'll need to reform your government to include them, sometimes at the cost of your government's legitimacy, a measure of how your current policies match up with the interest groups that are in the government. You cannot bring marginalized groups into the government, though, so you'll have to improve their clout before you can do so. So, to empower an interest group and to enable their ideologies and preferred laws to flourish in your nation, you need to improve their clout. The key ways to do so are to enrich the pops in said interest groups, and by influencing which interest groups your pops join as best as possible.
You could also promote interest groups using authority. I think you might have mentioned this. It's interesting to note that a lot of the interest groups, like when the landowners are in charge, and like a lot of their laws give you more authority anyways, so it makes transitioning away from them a bit easier. But transitioning to them was probably pretty tough.
We discussed how to influence pop wealth through income and expenses in the last two videos, but to influence which interest groups they join, you'll need to consider the attraction modifiers outlined when hovering over the interest group population. You need to try to align as many pops as you can.
So this is, I think, important or relevant to look at this sort of thing. You know, notice it doesn't say, does it say farmers? It does say farmers. And so farmers, clergymen, and aristocrats build your farms in unincorporated states if you want to disempower the landowners, you know. Build them in incorporated states if you want to empower them, because the farmers are going to join this interest group, or more likely to.
And to be attracted to the interest groups you want to empower. Encourage pops to change professions to those that gravitate towards.
So build up a bunch of industry that is part of the interest groups you want.
Your preferred interest groups. Enable or prevent their increased literacy. Research.
So for example, in the last one, bureaucrats was one of them. You get bureaucrats from government administration, I believe also from universities.
Search or avoid relevant technologies and use your authority to bolster or suppress interest groups that you wish to grow or shrink respectively. Interest groups have a very powerful influence on the stability of your nation and the direction in which it evolves over time through policy changes and lawmaking. If you're interested in learning more about that, make sure to subscribe to this channel and get notified when the next video releases focused on.
I think in general you want to try and change the interest groups in a subtle way as opposed to starting a civil war. I think that civil wars are really expensive in terms of you increase the dependence, you decrease the population, you decrease the workforce. But notably, when you increase the dependence by having them get injured, you make it so that the standard of living just will fall, and you're not gaining anything except for changing the political groups. I don't know exactly how well it's going to be balanced, but my guess is going to be it's going to be balanced away from revolution and war as like an effective method, but we'll see. Going to jump into the next one, which is policies and laws tutorial. So this sounds like it's actually going to be pretty
Hey, it's
nice
Kara.
overall.
I run a YouTube channel where I make especially chaotic gaming videos on strategy games like Crusader Kings 3 and Hearts of Iron 4. Today, I'm collaborating with Paradox Interactive for a Victoria 3 tutorial on policies and laws, one of the most important ways you can influence your country. We'll start with explaining what laws and policies are, then cover the process of passing a policy or law, then we'll also cover institutions and authority. The laws in the politics screen lets us have a good look at three different categories. The power structure category, which affects what pops can vote, what pops are discriminated against, and even the structure of your government itself. The economy category, which...
Discrimination, I think, is actually going to be something in game that I don't know how important migration is going to be, but it affects migration, and so lowering discrimination to attract migrants is... I think, going to be quite a powerful effect, but we'll see.
Controls the laws around your nation's taxation and trade policies, and what it spends on healthcare, schooling, policing, and even its colonization policies, and the human rights category, affecting freedom of speech laws, welfare, working conditions, and the rights of women and children. All of these laws and policies are vitally important to the lives of your pops, and define the character of your country as the game progresses. To pass a law in Victoria 3, at least one interest group in your government must endorse the law for it to be an option to be passed. If the interest groups in your government don't endorse the law or policy you want to pass, you can reform the government to add an interest group, potentially at the cost of your legitimacy. If the interest group you want to add to your government happens to be a marginalized interest group, however, you first need to bolster their clout before reforming the government to add them. Then you can begin the process of enacting the law.
You bolster their clout by making them rich and having more of them in your country by having production buildings that are in alignment with the pop.
Laws have a
interest group.
percent chance to pass based on the clout of the interest groups that endorse it, and the length of time between the chances for a law to pass is determined by your government legitimacy. However, beware that some interest groups in your government can delay or stall laws from passing if they oppose them.
You can also, if you increase your the amount of bureaucracy, excess bureaucracy you have, it makes the ticks happen a little faster. I think it's probably pretty marginal, but we'll see.
Some laws also enable institutions. Institutions allow countries to provide an assortment of services to their citizens, from school and healthcare systems to law enforcement.
I think starting out early on, like one of the major expenses is going to be construction, and then later on it starts to shift a bit more towards institutions. And so you have to think about, is this institution valuable? Because the trade-off is just having more money inside your economy, because whenever you tax something, you take money out of your economy. You make buildings less profitable, like this sort of thing. And so it's a trade-off to be paying for it. And so you have to think about when you want to inject and when you want to extract.
Institutions cost a certain amount of bureaucracy to enable an upgrade, which is based on the population count of the incorporated territories in your country, excluding colonies and other unincorporated territories. If you run low on bureaucracy, you can also generate more from building additional government administration buildings. And institutions can be upgraded at an additional cost to provide better bonuses to a max of level 5. The specific effects of the institution is determined by the law passed as well. For example, private healthcare provides a reduction in mortality based on wealth, while public healthcare provides a reduction in mortality regardless of wealth. But what if you want to personally exercise your power as a ruler without using laws or policies? That's where authority comes in. Authority is the capacity your government has to perform certain actions outside of its normal function, like taxing specific goods or influencing individual interest groups.
I think it's really interesting that authority seems to be easier to access the less liberal you are, which could help you liberalize, but once you're more liberal, you get less authority, and so it's harder to become less liberal than the other way around. It's interesting how they managed to get this into the game using authority as a resource.
Generally, more repressive societies will generate more authority, so it's a trade-off between personal liberties and the ability to directly affect your country and its pops. Decrees are a useful tool to further achieve a country's goals. If a player wants to incentivize migration somewhere, the Greener Grass campaign increases migration attraction by 50%.
I'm actually super excited to try out this edict in my Tunis run, because Tunis starts out as part of the Ottomans market, migration is intermarket, and there is some larger outer market migration, but it's intermarket. And so my idea is, if I really increase the migration attraction, I can just extract pops from the Ottomans, namely pops that are like machinists and these higher qualification pops, because I want to try and increase the salaries of these pops in my nation. We'll see how that goes, but do this in order to industrialize way faster, and I don't have to worry about producing stuff like grain and timber and this sort of stuff, because I'll just buy it from the Ottomans, or I'll buy it within their market.
Or, if a player is planning on declaring a war, enlistment efforts can temporarily increase the amount of conscripts a state provides, and speeds up the process of training them. In the next video, we'll cover using diplomatic plays to set the stage for war.
Okay, so that was policies and laws tutorial. Now we'll jump in with the diplomacy tutorial.
Hey, it's Kara. I'm known for my especially chaotic videos on strategy games like Crusader Kings 3 and Hearts of Iron 4. Today, I'm collaborating with Paradox Interactive to deliver a tutorial on diplomacy and using it to navigate the complex world of Victoria 3. This video will cover interests, diplomatic actions, and diplomatic plays. To begin, it's important to understand interests. An interest defines a country's ability to interact with a country in a strategic region. Interests let your country diplomatically engage and trade with the countries within these regions. There are two types of interests, natural and declared. A natural interest is any strategic region that your country already has territory in. Conversely, declared interests allow a country to select a neighboring strategic region to interact with. Some countries don't start with any declared interest slots, but you can
I found this so fascinating when I found this out, because it makes it like you have to try and increase your power either through navy or like military or something else, your prestige, in order to rank up, in order to be able to just declare an interest anywhere.
You can increase the number of slots you have by increasing your country rank and by building naval bases. If a country is in one of your interest regions, you can perform diplomatic actions with them. The diplomatic actions that are instant, like expelling diplomats, have no influence costs. However, continuous diplomatic actions, like improving relations, have an upkeep cost of influence as long as you keep performing them. Influence is a representation of your country's ability to engage in sustained diplomacy.
So I think that this is like going to be one of the major benefits of like ranking up in terms of power rankings, and is why sometimes you'll want to overbuild your military or your navy, because you want to just have access to more influence, so that you can have more trade agreements, more alliances, more protection packs, like this sort of thing. I know in my Tunis run, I specifically like want to buddy up with both France, but also have a trade agreement in Russia is kind of what I'm thinking, and maybe a trade agreement with Austria / buddy up with them. And there's no way I can afford that in terms of influence early on, and so you're going to need to either like trade up or level up, or like, you know, this sort of thing. So just kind of interesting to that this is a driver, I think, of wanting to become powerful militarily, even if you're never going to war, just so you can rake in more influence so that you can gain stuff without needing to go to war.
Influence is primarily generated by your country's rank and the rank of countries you have rivalries with. For example, Great Britain might have an easier time performing diplomatic actions all around the world than, say, Brunei. You might be forced to be a lot more selective with your diplomacy as a smaller country, so choose carefully. One of the other things that you can do with influence is form diplomatic pacts. Diplomatic pacts are promises that two countries give to one another. Many of these require a high cost of influence per month, but also provide a lot of bonuses. You can promote free trade with other countries with the Trade Agreement Pact, but also promise to go to war together with the Alliance Pact. You can even demand the subjugation of a nation less technologically advanced than you by making them into a protectorate. Now, let's get into the more aggressive side of diplomacy in Victoria 3, diplomatic plays. In Victoria 3, warfare is seen as coming as a result of diplomacy, so creating a diplomatic play against another country is how you can set the stage for potentially going to war with another country, or maybe not, depending on how the diplomatic play plays out. As long as you don't have a truce with that country, diplomatic plays let you demand something of another country, such as their vassalage, their territory, or even demanding them to ban slavery. Many demands that start a diplomatic play incur a cost in infamy, however. Infamy can have some negative repercussions, such as making it more likely that pops in annexed territory will join radical factions, and giving other countries access to a cut-down-to-size diplomatic play option against you at 100 infamy. Most war goals will give out infamy based on the rank of the two countries involved and the size of the demand.
I found this super interesting, so that if you're like a small podunk country, I assume no one cares when you get messed with, but if you're like a large country, people are really alarmed if you like take their land. If you look on the left, maybe you can see, maybe it's more expensive to take from Spain than their colony, I can't really tell, but in my Tunis run, I'm particularly concerned that France can just smack me around and not face any repercussions.
Adding a war goal to a diplomatic play will add infamy, so make sure it's realistically achievable through war.
Important to emphasize, just adding it adds infamy. You don't even have to get it. Also, this is going to make it, as you add the additional war goals, it's going to be harder to convince people to come to your side because you are accruing infamy. And so you might have been able to convince someone before you added a war goal, but then now after you add a war goal, now suddenly they don't want to back you.
Once a diplomatic play is started, it will go through 3 phases before triggering a war, if it goes to war. The opening moves phase lets both sides decide on their demands and set their stances. The second phase is perhaps the most important. In the diplomatic maneuvering phase, other powers with an interest in the region may choose to join either side. You can also sway them with obligations or even promise them war goals to be achieved in the conflict. Countries can even switch sides if one offers a better incentive than the other. You can't get complacent in your attempts to win over third parties after all. The third stage of the diplomatic play is the countdown to war. In this stage, countries are locked into the sides they picked and the demands are set in stone. The only action that's possible now is to back down. When a country backs down, they essentially decide to cut their losses and acquiesce to a country before war breaks out. Importantly, backing down grants the opposing country only their main demand, so any secondary demands won't be included. There might be some situations where you don't want to sway every country to your side that you could to incentivize the diplomatic play escalating into war. Assuming a side doesn't back down before the escalation meter maxes out, the diplomatic play ends and war breaks out, which we'll cover in the next video in the series. Subscribe to the Paradox Interactive YouTube channel to get notified when that video is released. And
so that was diplomacy with Hey It's Kara. Now let's take a look at it. Or look at warfare. Tutorial.
Hey, it's Kara. I'm known for my especially chaotic videos on strategy games like Crusader Kings 3 and Hearts of Iron 4. Today, I'm collaborating with Paradox Interactive for a tutorial on how Victoria 3's warfare mechanics work. In this video, we'll go over building armies and navies, fronts, battles, naval warfare, and peace deals. In Victoria 3, professional standing...
So this is going to be explained, but I really like how there's no tactical advantage you can get over the AI by being able to move around your armies more effectively in Victoria 3, because it really makes it about the economics and not about just tactically shafting the AI, because AI is never good at tactics.
Armies are built through barracks buildings. Every country will start the game with some of them, but you can build more. Every barracks building will give you a battalion of 1,000 servicemen and officers, if there's 1,000 pops available in the state. Naval bases are naval counterparts to the barracks. Each naval base gives you 1 flotilla to use in your war. Conscription centers are a way to raise temporary servicemen and officers when you're in a diplomatic play or war. Conscription centers exist in every state, and depending on your army model law, conscription centers allow you to pull a certain percentage of your pops out of their professions and into your army. But conscripting pops will prevent those pops from contributing to your economy and put them at risk of becoming a casualty. When you activate...
I think in general, you're going to want to not conscript unless you absolutely have to.
Conscripts, you can choose which state to pull conscripts from, so it's generally a better idea to pull conscripts into the army from your least productive states. Like all other buildings in Victoria 3, naval bases, barracks, and conscription centers have production methods that you can change throughout the game. With new technologies, you can push the new production methods into your military buildings to upgrade their stats. These new production methods will be more expensive than the last, however, so be sure your economy can afford them. Units that are first built without a general or admiral to command them will be sent into a reserve. To field them in your wars, assign a general or admiral in a strategic region that has reserve units available, and pick one of the 2 characters to recruit. Make sure to check their character traits to select the best option for your needs. Generals and admirals have a command limit, which is a certain number of units they can field from.
They'll also empower the faction, whatever faction they're from, so you probably also want to look at their faction.
Army or Navy reserves in a strategic region. If you have more than the max number of reserves than a general or admiral's command limit, either recruit another character or promote one of your existing generals or admirals to a higher rank. Now that we've covered how to prepare our military, we can dive into the actual mechanics of how warfare works, starting with where most of the action will take place: land warfare. With every conflict in Victoria 3, a front is automatically created between opposing countries' borders. This is how land warfare in Victoria 3 is conducted. Instead of moving around armies on a map, you control a front, or potentially a number of fronts, and your success in a war depends on pushing the front line into the opposing side's territory. There's 3 orders you can give to a general: a standby, defend front, and Advance Front. Standby orders the general to remain idle without joining a front. Their troops will be garrisoned to try to best prevent enemy incursion. Defend Front tells your general to gather their troops and defend enemy advances along the targeted front line without trying to advance themselves. Their focus will be on intercepting advancing opposing armies and repelling enemy forces. Advance Front tells a general to gather their troops and try to attack to make incursions into enemy territory along the targeted front line. Defend and Advance orders both carry significant attrition risk with them, as most troops of the time simply died of causes outside of battle while on campaign, so make sure you're prepared to face losses even while outside of combat. Depending
It'll be interesting to see how techs affect attrition, and if attrition turns out to be kind of the thing you care about most. I think if you were slapping around nations much weaker than you, then suddenly you really, really care about attrition. So this might be, if you're planning on picking on nations that are weaker than you, when recruiting generals, looking at ones that reduce attrition might be the very most important thing.
on the traits of your generals and your army composition, the exact effects of these orders may vary. Reckless generals will increase offensive attack power at the cost of more casualties. Additionally, the war goals of a territory and even the local terrain will modify how the front progresses throughout the course of the war. During the war, when an advance order is initiated by at least one general on one side of a front, a time to battle meter will fill up, starting a battle. Both sides will automatically select a leading general, and a province will be automatically picked. A number of units will be brought in, both from the participating generals and other nearby generals and garrisons along the front line. Additionally, a random battle condition is rolled for both sides of the fight, helping or hampering either side. Once the fighting starts, each side's strength will be calculated by a balance of power. In each progressive round, the stronger side will inflict damage on the other until
some tactic that I'm a bit curious about. So she talked about either offensive or defensive assigning a little bit earlier, but something I'm thinking that might be effective, but I'm not really sure, is will it be the case that you want to assign some of your groups as defensive and some as offensive in order to try and ensure that you don't just trade your territory for theirs with the opponent, and you make sure you hold on to your territory. So you assign like 80% of your troops to be offensive and 20% to be defensive along a front, because I believe the defensive ones, well, I don't know if the defensive ones will advance into the enemy territory and hold it, or if the defensive ones will only stay in your sovereign territory. This is kind of something interesting that I think needs to be played around with a little bit, but this is maybe one of the min-maxy things you can do since you can't like operate tactically.
Until one side morale reaches 0, ending the battle. When a land battle ends, depending on how decisive it is, an army captures a number of provinces along the front line. If a defending general wins the battle, they can only retake their own territory. If an attacking general wins the battle, they can advance the front line into enemy territory. Now that we understand how land warfare works, let's get into the details of naval warfare. Naval warfare can be a critical...
I'm really excited to see how dynamic the naval warfare is, because I think that navies ought to be more important in Victoria 3, and I'm really hoping that there's some complexity and nuance to naval battles, which, like, historically in games just seem hard to make that way.
Critical supporting element to a successful campaign, even letting you win against stronger land armies due to your country's superior ability to control the waves.
I also think that in my Tunis run, I'm probably going to emphasize Navy and not worry about the land so much, and so that's another reason why I'm kind of interested in /focused on it.
Just like your army, your navy is wielded by giving your admirals orders. These orders are escort convoys, which allows your assigned navy to protect a supply route, patrol coast, which sends your admiral to a coastline to protect it from other fleets, raid convoys, which tells your fleet to destroy enemy supply lines, and naval invasions, which ships your army off to an enemy coastline, initiating a naval landing which, if successful, will open up a new front line on the enemy shores. If one fleet intercepts another performing a mission, a naval battle is initiated, which essentially works the same way that land battles do. Each side chooses an admiral, rounds up the nearby fleets, and each side gains a random battle condition. Afterwards, the fight progresses until one side morale reaches 0. The side that loses has to return to a friendly coast for repairs and can lose a number of ships. Unlike land battles, which will take enemy territory, naval battles won't gain you any new land, but will disable a fleet for the time being, allowing your admirals to carry out their orders unimpeded.
It seems like they don't have capturing ships on release, but I imagine this is something they'll include because it was a major or it seems to me that it was a major, like, aspect of naval battle at the time.
Finally, let's talk about the purpose of why you'd even be interested in going to war in the first place. Getting what you want
Obviously economics.
in a peace deal. In Victoria 3, the mechanic behind measuring the progress of a war is war support. Each country in a war starts with 100 war support, but it's reduced on either side by having their territory captured, losing pops to battle and attrition, internal turmoil, and having the enemy control their war goals. While technically a country can choose to capitulate at any time, when a country's war support reaches -100, a country is forced to capitulate. A country capitulating doesn't mean the war as a whole ends.
Something that was interesting in the Egypt run was if you have radicals, you accumulate war weariness much faster. And so this is maybe, this is a dynamic to think about, but I think that it's like, it adds a lot to the flavor of the game, where, you know, if you know you're going to go to war, perhaps you don't want to piss off your pops beforehand and tax the crap out of them. But, you're going to need a big war chest, because as soon as you go to war, the price of arms is just going to shoot up, or, like, that's what I've seen, like, throughout the various playthroughs, and so, you know, it's a balancing act.
However, if there's still war goals that haven't been captured yet, the war can continue on. There is a second way that wars can end too: negotiated peace deals. If a war isn't likely to end by total capitulation, countries that are the main war leaders on either side can send over a peace deal for the war goals being fought for. The war support on both sides of the conflict is important to consider for what a country will accept in a peace deal. Even if the winning side has low enough war support, the losing side may not be willing to agree to giving up as much in the peace deal. Assuming you can construct a deal that works for all sides, you can end the conflict.
That's such a diplomatic way of putting it. It works for all sides, like someone's not getting bent over.
Mobilize your armies and return all of your conscripted troops home. With that, that's the end of the Victoria 3 tutorial series.
That is the end of the tutorial series. I think that, in regards to war, I think war is going to be a very real expense, and is going to feel like not so good relative to other strategy games where it's just like, oh, par of the course, you know, like where it's like if you're not using your army, you're losing it. That's kind of how it felt a bit in EU4, you know, where for the most part, if you're trying to min-max, you should be at war a lot. I don't think that's going to be the same in Victoria, which will be interesting. Anyways, this is the end of the tutorial series. Hopefully, the video didn't get too frozen up, like earlier, but I am very excited for the Tunis run. I'm very excited for the release of the game. I'm very excited in a couple days for the content embargo to be lifted and for us to get actual substantive gameplay from content creators rather than, you know, this whatever it is that I'm doing, where I'm just trying to react to the various content that, like, is available, or the various information, and make, like, speculations, which is a lot of what this is. You know, a lot of what I've said might just go out the window. It's just something to maybe focus on, be aware of, as you're starting your play, because I think a lot of things might be, like, really punishing long term in terms of, like, if you're not aware of it or it's not on your radar, but maybe not. We'll see how things shake out. If you like this video, feel free to do the YouTube algorithm stuff, you know, like, comment, subscribe. It feels so obligatory to say this at the end of videos, and, like, I rant about this, like, once every 20 videos, on my various channels, but, like, it's this interesting dynamic where asking someone to like, comment, subscribe, seems to produce a desired effect, in that, you know, they like, comment, or subscribe more often, but it's this weird performative gesture where I don't think it adds substantively to the content of the video to ask someone to like, comment, subscribe, you know? And also, the request to like, comment, subscribe, etc. is implied, and so it's this weird, like, game that every single YouTube video plays that is implicit in what's going on anyways, and it's... I don't... Like, sometimes I just get, like, annoyed at the whole thing, but annoyed isn't quite the right word, but it's difficult to articulate. It's just this seemingly, like, necessary but slightly inauthentic thing to ask for, you know, like, comments, and subscribes, or whatever, or rewatches. No one asks for rewatches. I'm pretty sure that helps juice the algorithm as well. Anyways, as far as discussion goes, I think this is going to might be the last content video I make. If anyone's playing as like a nation that they think is interesting, so like not a great power, feel free to let me know. And if you're planning on playing as a great power, you don't need to let me know in the comments section. Because I'm trying to think of a backup country to play when Tunis is just too hard to play, which I think is fairly probable. And so, yeah. Anyways, if you haven't gone on a walk recently, it's really good for your health. Like, there was a recent study that showed that, like, being sedentary versus being really active with walking increased your all-cause mortality by more than being obese or being a smoker, which I found fascinating. Walking's pretty free, and if you're like me, planning on the 25th to not walk at all because we're just playing Victoria 3 all day, maybe get your steps in now. Anyways, have a good day.